had an ability to keep in the orbit that it needed so it wouldn't crash through the atmosphere, but that these satellites might have been launched from 20, 30,000 years ago from this planet.
Well, of course, now you're getting into an entirely different area, which is, was there a highly technologically advanced civilization in humanity's prehistory? And I'm pretty convinced there was, because all you have to do is look at all of the facts and information, the odd places, the odd statues, the odd artifacts that are now available, and we find that science tends to turn a blind eye to this because they call them anomalies, okay, which is just a fancy word for what the heck is it?
Exactly.
You know, we don't know what this is, and it doesn't fit very well with our little paradigm, with our worldview, the way we have everything all mapped out. And but you know, we're heading right now for something that I'd really like to talk about. But before we get totally away from the Kennedy assassination, there's something I really want to share with you.
Okay, tell me.
Back last November, as you and your listeners are well aware, there was just this spate of documentaries and retrospectives and stuff, and most of it was pretty lightweight material.
Right.
It was
the men who killed JFK and all these stories that were
all this stuff that floated around. But I'll tell you, I think the worst one actually was ABC's huge documentary, and of course the keystone there was a computer model that they had done. Well, first off, they just changed everything. For 40 years, they've been telling us that Kennedy was shot through the neck, through the strap muscles of his neck. The bullet didn't hit anything, went on to strike Connally. This, of course, is the infamous single bullet theory, which is the bedrock of the lone assassin theory. And this time, though, they actually showed the bullet wound in the middle of the back, below the shoulder blades, which is exactly where the autopsy placed it. But, of course, to make it work, they had to have him all hunched over, which in none of the photographs or films do we ever see him doing this.
Yeah, he was sitting up with his back erect and everything else.
Erect. Well, he had a back brace on.
Yeah.
He couldn't have bent too far. And he was waving. So in this computer simulation, they've got him all bent over to the point of looking like a hunchback. And then they've got a red straight line going through his back at the correct entrance point, unlike what they told us for 40 years, coming out through the front portion of his neck and going on down and striking Connally. Connally, they had moved over several inches from where they previously said he was, and then had him turned and contorted, and Peter Jennings was able to say, see, one shot can go through these both men. But what was deceitful about it was the red line comes out of Connally's chest and then just stops in midair. And, of course, what you see there looks reasonable. One shot could have pierced them if they were in these positions. But what they failed to tell you is that if they had gone on with that red line, it would have had to curve around to the right and strike Connally's wrist from the anterior side, the top side, shatter his wrist bone, and then end up in his left thigh, which would have made this huge question mark curve right there in midair, which, of course, a bullet cannot do. So I thought that was kind of deceitful. But the main thing is this. While they were using a computer model, which we all know the computer can't lie, but what we also know is garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yep.
A computer cannot tell you anything more than what you program into it. Now, at that same time, I was approached by national television in Japan, and they did a big, huge Kennedy assassination special, and they, too, based it on a computer model, except they went to Poland, they went to Scotland Yard, they went all over the world and got computer experts, and, you know, guess what they came up with? 5 shots from 4 locations.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so again, but now here's the clincher. Any computer model would have to be 100% accurate, would have to have 100% accurate topographical information about Dealey Plaza, right? You would have to know the exact elevations, distances, trajectories, all of this stuff. And if anything was wrong, then the whole thing will be thrown out of kilter, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Where did they get that information? Well, all of these people that have done these computer models get that basic survey work from the Warren Commission. who in the spring of 1964 hired then Dallas County surveyor Bob West and his associate Chester Brenneman to go and survey Dealey Plaza based on frames from the Zapruder film. And they would line it all up, and they would measure everything, and they would get it down to the nth degree. Now, here's the problem, George. Years ago, I interviewed both of those men. And both of them, in separate interviews, told me that the Warren Commission altered their figures.
Altered the figures.
Altered the figures, and I can prove this because Chester Brenneman allowed me to make a photocopy of his original plat map. And not only are some of the critical frame numbers changed in the Warren Commission report, but on his original map, they had marked bullet marks on the curb, bullet marks on the sidewalk, a bullet mark in the street, and they both of them said the Warren Commission ordered them to take all that out. So I just think that people need to understand that I don't care who's doing the computer model. For example, if ABC may have even done an honest computer model, but it was based on erroneous information.
Information, exactly. Information that maybe they thought was right.
Well, they didn't have any other way to know. I mean,
No.
you know, except the Warren Commission should have known because the surveyors gave them the correct information.
Why would the Warren
Changed within the Warren Commission.
Why would they want to change it?
Well, so that they can argue that cockamamie single bullet theory and hence support the whole idea that it was a lone assassin.
And just simply tuck Oswald away in history.
That's right. Well, and of course the lone nut got killed by another lone nut in the basement of the police station, handcuffed policemen, surrounded by policemen. But there's no conspiracy there, folks. Just one lone nut killed the other lone nut.
Do you think we'll ever really find out what happened?
Sure, George. We know what happened now. It's just that what you're really asking is,
will
there ever be a press conference and will somebody get up speaking for the U.S. government and say, okay, here's the real truth about Kennedy? No, I don't expect that, and I don't think we're ever going to get that. Because to reveal the truth, to reveal that there was a coup d'etat in this country in 1963 would just cause all kinds of turmoil. I mean, look what happens, for example. I'll give you a modern example. We had a whistleblower that blew the whistle on the FBI crime lab and showed that they had falsified some information and that they had not done some of their testing procedures correctly, et cetera, and as a result, there was a spate of court cases, and a lot of people demanded appeals, and a lot of people got off because the basic prosecution was flawed.
Right.
Now, if that happened in just that one little case with just some questions and a cloud hanging over the FBI crime lab, think what would happen to all the laws that's been passed by what would be essentially illegal administrations.
Well,
so nobody's ever going to admit to that. But if you want to know the truth is known now. Again, all you have to do is just go, but you're going to have to go study it for yourself. You can't listen to any one person. That includes me. Can't listen to anybody. You have to go and study the whole case out and check it out. And I think that, of course, this is impossible, but I think the one thing that would convince any reasonable person is to go and get one of those 7.5 Mannlicher Carcano Italian war rifles and get you 3 rounds of ammunition and go out and simply fire the stationary target at 230 feet or whatever it was.
Within a
and
certain...
you can put 2 shots out of 3 into that target, and I want to tell you the best marksman in the world really can't do it.
And within just seconds. Within just seconds, Jim. I mean, you wouldn't have time to do it. And I don't think anybody could do that.
Able to do it.
Stick with us. Jim Martin also about the possibility of our own technology thousands of years ago that might be able to put satellites or rocket ships into space. And I keep looking at our civilization, and let's say it's around 2,000 years old. When did our technology really start to explode? Could you say it was around the 1850s? Is that a pretty accurate guess?
Well, I would have to say yes. Of course, with the scientific age, and in the late 1800s, with the invention of, for example, the phonograph, the telephone, the motion picture camera, things like that, those were all outstanding breakthroughs. But those were basically a normal progression of work that had been done a long time before. They had really, really primitive and early operating cameras back in almost in the late 1700s. If you talk about an explosion of technology, I think you have to go back to post-1947. Okay?
All right.
Isn't that interesting?
Okay.
Starting in the early 50s and through today, anyone knowledgeable person would have to admit that there has been an incredible explosion of technology. Lasers, fiber optics, computers, you name it, night vision, and so much of that, for instance, Colonel Corso said, was passed along based on technology gained from the crash at Roswell.
Less than 60 years, then, we have tremendous technology where up until about 2,000 years, we have virtually none. How can that be? Yeah.
Exactly. And look at the progress of, for example, you know, in the late 1800s, the primary transportation mode was a horse and wagon. And then, just within a few years, they developed a small engine. They put the engine on a wagon, and you had the early, bulky, square-looking cars. And then they decided, well, let's cut down the wind resistance. And by the 30s and 40s, you had pretty sleek-looking cars. And then in the 1900s, they put a bigger engine on there, added wings, and we finally had flight in 1903 when the Wright brothers took off. And then look where we've come from those little box kite things with a lawnmower engine on them to today with the super jets and the test things that we don't even know about, like the Aurora, which isn't supposed to exist, but yet
it's out there.
It's out there. Everybody writes about it. And now, see, you're leading me to something. I want to take you even beyond today. And I'm going to tell you about what we're working on now.
All right.
It is so far ahead of everything. But again, we have a problem because if they bring this technology out, it's liable to threaten the monopolies and the stability of the economy, the world economy today. And, you know, something that monumental could even lead to war, couldn't it?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. So but I'm going to have to back you into this a little bit.
Okay.
Let's go back. Let me tell you the story of David Hudson, who was simply a farmer out in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that you're some just little old dirt farmer. This guy was a multimillionaire, okay? And he had a big, huge agri-corporation type business going. But he had a real problem because he wasn't making a lot of money and he wasn't doing very good with his farming enterprise because the soil is so baked and so dry that it's really tough to get anything going. You've got to irrigate constantly. So he found in the early 70s that by spraying his soil with a cyanide solution, he tried doing this to break up the soil, but in the process he found out he could obtain traces of metals in the ore, including gold and silver and platinum metals. So he got to thinking, well, I got lots of earth movers and water trucks and road graders, backhoes, all that kind of thing. So why don't I just see if I can get minerals out of the ground? So he checked around, found a place that he could set up his operation, and he started recovering gold and silver. And the way they do it is they would take charcoal and they would from the ground, and they'd strip it with hot cyanide and sodium hydroxide, run it through an electrowinning cell to get the gold out, and then they did what they called a fire assay, which is where you run it through a crucible or a furnace type thing. You heat it to a certain degree, and then you would finally leach out this gold and silver, you know. Well, he wasn't getting a lot, but he was getting some. But what he discovered was he was getting little beads of material that baffled attempts at analysis. Something was recovering with the gold and silver that they couldn't explain. And what it turned out to be was an elements heretofore unknown to modern science. These were elements composed of a single atom. Now, this monatomic matter is found in virtually everything around us, including the food we eat and the water we drink, in just very minute quantities. And he found that he could retrieve these monatomic elements from noble metals such as gold, silver, copper, cobalt, and the platinum, palladium, rhodium, iridium, osmium, stuff like that. Okay, now, what he found is that this monatomic matter acted in a very unusual manner. The nucleus of the atom would stretch and would transform, and it would change the basic composition of the atom. Well, you know, this is pretty wild stuff. And so he took it to an analytical chemist who informed him that what we have here is something that I know is pure rhodium, and yet none of the spectroscopic analyses are saying it's rhodium. It's something else. He said, I've never been taught anything about this. So they took it to Iowa State University, and they couldn't identify what it was. They took it to Harwell Laboratories in Oxfordshire, England, and they couldn't identify it. And he finally found with the old Soviet Academy of Sciences that they had some specialized equipment, and they were able to see that this mysterious white substance was composed entirely of platinum group metals in a form previously unknown to modern science. In other words, this monatomic. In fact, he called this stuff ORME, orbitally rearranged monatomic elements.
And was he the first person on this planet to stumble into this, or was it known before?
That's where the story gets interesting. He was the first person in modern day to come up with this, okay? And in fact, since then, since his discovery, he filed in 1988, he filed U.S. and worldwide patents on 11 monatomic elements. And since then, you never hear about any of this because this is getting into really basic, cutting-edge physics. And so you don't really hear much about this, and then there's a reason for that, too, that I'll get to. But I have a series of scientific papers all dating from the mid to late 80s and up through the 90s with, you know, fancy names like super deformation in palladium 104 and 105, or structure of osmium and palladium isotopes. And all these are from the Physical Review, which is the publication of the American Physical Society. Another paper from the Niels Bohr Institute, quantum size effects and rapidly rotating nuclei. So they are now beginning to mess with the basic building blocks of the atom, okay, which we all know is the basic building blocks of everything. You and I are composed of atoms. The chair you're sitting on is composed of atoms. And so, you know, this was really quite something. But he happened to mention to a rabbi friend of his, have you ever heard about this white powder made from gold? And the rabbi told him, why, yes, but to our knowledge, no one has known how to make it since the destruction of the first temple, Solomon's temple. He said the white powder is the magic, which can be used for white magic or black magic. So Hudson and a bunch of other people, myself included, began to research and find out, well, is there instances in past history that might show us that there was a knowledge of the white powder of gold? And actually, there is. In fact, you can go back to the story of Exodus when Moses led the children of Israel through the wilderness and they didn't have anything to eat. And he came up with a white powder that they all wondered, well, what is this? And in fact, what is it? Translated from the ancient Hebrew is manna. This was the manna of the Old Testament.
And a lot of us thought at the time we were talking about some kind of a wheat or something like that. It was not.
Exactly. Yeah. Because this is digestible. It does make a powdery flour type substance. You can't eat it. And you know what it does? It repairs your DNA. Apparently. That's what studies are beginning to show. Now, in 1914, I believe it was, you had, 1904, I'm sorry, you had the British archaeologist Sir William Petrie, who discovered on Mount Horeb in the South Sinai Peninsula what he described as an ancient Egyptian temple. And what he found in this temple was a crucible, a furnace, and where they had apparently been working with gold because nearby there were gold and silver mines.
Yeah, sounds like ancient alchemy, huh?
Exactly. That's what the alchemists were after, the philosopher's stone, which is not truly a stone, it's a process, okay? And they were trying to figure out, and of course the whole idea was how to transmute lead into gold, base metals into gold. They knew gold. In fact, think about it, George. all throughout history, everybody has this thing for gold. Well, yeah, gold is kind of a precious metal, but then so is silver, so is, copper, so is others. And yet gold has always held everybody's fascination. And what they find is the monatomic elements can be made from gold more easily than any other thing. Now, what they now call Mount Horeb was also known as the Mount of Moses. And they figured that this is where Moses took the gold and silver and melted down to create the manna, the white powder.
He knew what he knew what he was doing, didn't he?
He knew what he was doing, and he had this knowledge. Yeah. And Petrie, when he discovered this temple, they pulled up the flagstones, and underneath they found secreted away all this white powder. But they didn't know what it was, so they just left it open, and the wind all blew it all away. Yeah. Now you go back into further biblical accounts, and you find that when Moses came down off the mountain with his tablets, he found that the children of Israel had taken all their gold, melted it down, and made a golden calf, and were worshiping it.
Exactly.
Okay?
I remember that from the old movie, huh?
That's right. Now, they knew there was something mystical, magical about this gold, but they just weren't sure what it was. I mean, of course, Moses came down, found them worshiping the calf, and threw a fit. He crashed the tablets to the ground, and then, according to Exodus 32, he took the calf they had made and burned it in the fire, and then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Well, now, wait a minute. If you melt down gold and make somebody drink it, what's going to happen? You're just going to kill them. You can't drink molten gold. But he ground it into powder. He made the white powder from gold, and he made them drink it. And that's when they really began to move as a people. Okay? So where did Moses learn all this? Well, it's very clear that he was a ranking Egyptian, and that he had studied all of the secrets of the Egyptians, and they had learned all their secrets. This is kind of a generality, but it's true. The Egyptians had learned all their secrets from the biblical patriarch Abraham, who is the not only of the Jews, but of the Arabs, too. They both claim him as their founding patriarch. And the Bible tells us that Abraham was really not a Jew. He came from Ur of the Chaldees. Well, what's Chaldea? What was Chaldea? That was simply a biblical term meaning Mesopotamia.
Right.
And the city of Ur is right over there between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which is now modern-day Iraq. Okay? So, we find that, and by the way, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the earliest known complete book, where they gave all their funerary rites, we find that as the pharaohs made their way to the afterlife, at each step they would stop and say, "What is it?" The exact same translation of manna. I think they were dealing with this monatomic powdered gold.
And Lawrence Gardner has done some investigations, as you well know, into this too.
Yes, Lawrence has worked on this and has put a lot of this together. Now, what I've padded into is that with this monatomic powder, they found that it had very, very unusual properties. When you put it into a scale, the weighing pan of a scale, the pan weighed less than it did before you put the powder in it.
Yeah. Yes.
That means it's got anti-gravitational properties. And so now we're really looking at something. And then when they heated the powder to a certain degree, it disappeared. Well, now they're really getting interested, and I'm sure that heads were perking up, because who wouldn't like an invisible tank or an invisible plane, okay? But then, George, they found something really extraordinary. They took a little spatula and they stirred around the pan, trying to figure out where it went. Couldn't feel anything. But then as this material cooled, it became visible again, only it wasn't all stirred up. It was back into the original configuration it was when they first put it in the pan, which means it didn't just go invisible, it went somewhere.
They even thought it had this levitation property, right?
Exactly. So what we're looking at now is the very real possibility that these single monatomic elements might open the door to limitless free energy, a cure for AIDS, cancer, longevity, faster than light speeds, anti-gravity, and perhaps even interdimensional or time travel. Okay? So it's amazing. And what they are thinking is that, see, the thing that makes us grow old and die is not our bodies. Our bodies, as any scientist or doctor will tell you, regenerates every cell in your body every few days or weeks, right? But what happens, though, is that there are these little caps that are on the end of our DNA chain called telomeres. And these caps, after a certain period, tell the DNA chain, quit reproducing the cells.
Yeah, just die down, get old.
Just go quiet. And what happens after that is oxidation takes over. The cells in our bodies die, and they're not replaced. And as a result, we have aging and eventually death. Okay? So now they estimate that these monatomic elements, if taken in a proper form and in a proper way, might release the telomerase caps, which means your body would continue to generate new cells, which means your lifespan could be extended by hundreds of years, perhaps even 1,000. And all of a sudden I'm going, bingo, we hear about Methuselah, and we hear about these patriarchs in the Old Testament that lived to be 800 years old, 700 years old, and I used to think, how could that be? But now, if they had the secret of the monatomic gold, that's how it could be. So this is amazing discoveries, okay? But you can see what impact this would have on our current technology and all like that, which brings us now to my real story. Starting in 1999 and continuing through early 2003, major news sources were reporting major new discoveries by archaeologists in Iraq. It wasn't us, because Saddam Hussein obviously was still mad at us over the first Gulf War.
That's right.
He wasn't letting us in there. Who was he letting in? He was letting in German and French archaeology teams, and they were going in there and making amazing new discoveries. In fact, one thought that they may have actually located the tomb of Gilgamesh.
Yes, I
And,
remember.
of course, if you've ever read the poem, one of the ancient scrolls depicting the story of Gilgamesh, we find that he was on a search for immortality.
Let's talk a little bit about that when we come back, James. We'll also open up the phone lines. What do your travels take you next? Are you going to that Washington X conference, by any chance, in April?
One to really attend, because the speaker lineup, of course, Steve Bassett is rounding this thing up. We got Dr. William Burns, we got Grant Cameron, Philip Corso Jr., Paul Davis, Stanton Freeman, Timothy Good, Dr. Stephen Greer, myself, Linda Moulton House, Scott Jones, of course, Richard Hoagland, Dr. McAbee, Nick Pope, you name them. They're all going to be there, and it's really going to be something. This is going to be, of course, in April 17th, 18th, up in the Washington area, actually in Gaithersburg, Maryland, at the Hilton, Washington, D.C. North. And of course, you can get all the information on that by going to the website, xconference.com. Before we go to the calls, if I could just wrap up my story, I'll try to make it.
I want you to finish that. Sure thing.
So we now know scientifically that they're now becoming aware of these monatomic elements, and that they have very unusual properties and could open the door perhaps to limitless free energy, perhaps time and dimensional travel faster than light speed. Now, obviously, somebody's going to be taking notice of that, and it was all being uncovered, perhaps, in Iraq. And where would all those artifacts and all those scrolls and all those steels go to but the Iraqi National Museum? And this, all of a sudden, we had to invade Iraq. The rest of the world was against it. The United Nations wouldn't back us up. But by golly, we had to go in there. We did, beginning on March the 20th of 2003. And what happened then? Did we do the normal military maneuvers where you go into an area, you seize your objective, you secure the area, and then move on to your next objective? No. We made a beeline for Baghdad. And that's why we're still having problems over there, because we never stopped to pacify the countryside. And once in Baghdad, what happened? Well, U.S. soldiers immediately protected the oil ministry, but the Iraqi National Museum was looted of more than 50,000 artifacts. And some very unusual things about that. This was not some unruly mob. Thousands of Iraqis were standing around shouting, "Don't do that. That's our national heritage, our national treasury." But everyone, museum officials, I have quotes from people around the world, they said this was a very organized thing.
It was like a theft, a real organized theft, wasn't it?
An organized theft. They had keys to the vaults. Cards were suspiciously missing.
Yeah, and it was our art collectors of the global elite that arranged that.
Found glass cutters that are not commercially available in Iraq, and they bypassed very expensive-looking fakes, and mostly they went to the basement, which is where you would put uncatalogued material that's just arrived and hasn't had time to be really examined. And all this was confirmed by Colonel Matthew Bogdanos in early this year. Colonel Bogdanos headed an investigation into the looting as Deputy Director for the Joint Interagency Coordination.
And these people are better known as the global mafia, criminals, the elite, always.
Group, and was given permission by General Tommy Franks. And he says that in the basement there were 10,000 pieces taken, and so far they've only recovered 650.
Oh my.
So where did all that go, and what was it? Was this the amazing archaeological discoveries, and did it pertain to this monatomic elements? Could this be the reason that we had to invade Iraq? Because I'm telling you what we're dealing with here, George, is we're getting into one of the most top secret things that they're working on right now. It's so top secret they've spent millions and perhaps billions of taxpayer dollars trying to tell us that it simply doesn't exist and won't work, and that's anti-gravity. The Nazis were working on it, and we probably picked up some information from them. We've been working on it. These, if you'll remember a few years back, the giant triangular-shaped craft that were seen over Belgium and Holland, and those people were really concerned. What is this? Are these space aliens? What is this? And they were finally told by their media that this was secret government test craft.
And we're seeing a lot of that here.
Exactly. So this is what they're working on, but you can also understand that not only would this be our secret weapons and aerospace technology, but that also, if all of this is true, it represents a quantum leap in our technology, which, again, would undermine the monopolies over petroleum and conventional propulsion systems. So I think it's very, very feasible that the true reason for our invasion of Iraq was to go in and get these ancient secrets. This is future technology from the past, because on those Sumerian tablets, which are still in existence, because they would push the cuneiform create cuneiform with a stylus pushed into clay tablets and then bake them, turn them to stone, and there's 500,000 of them still in existence. And the stories they tell are absolutely incredible, because the bottom line is they tell us that people came from the skies, landed on the earth, and colonized the earth in search of gold.
I know those historical tablets.
Right.
That
so you're well aware of that. So that's exactly what's going on, and I think perhaps that we are seeing here with all of the conflict and strife and controversy over what has happened and is happening in Iraq.
And don't forget all the blood dripping off their hands to do it. Absolutely.
I think there is a under-the-table struggle going on to gain control over this technology.
Well thought out. Well, keep following up on that for us, Jim, won't you?
Sure will.
All right, let's go east of the Rockies. We'll start with the phone calls here on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hi, George. How are you?
I am fine, thank you.
Hi, James.
Hi.
The show's sounding great tonight. You're fascinating stories. I wanted to know if the place where they saw the ghost of the aliens, if anyone's thought of doing EVPs there.
Now, refresh my memory on EVP.
Well, EVP is electronic voice phenomena. Jim.
Oh, yes.
You bring in some ghost investigators. We can help you with that if you want to do that, and they may be able to pick up some incredible ghostly sounds.
Well, if you heard the beginning of what I was saying, I only became aware of this story about a month ago. I'm planning to go back to Roswell the first of next month, but yes, I think the place is ripe for investigation. I don't know if I'm the one to do it because I'm just an old reporter, journalist, and an author. I don't have all the proper equipment, but I think that obviously this would be a place, especially now that George and I together found out tonight that apparently there's also human ghosts roaming around.
Can you imagine what the sounds of an alien ghost on tape might sound like? I'd love to hear that.
I would too.
I wonder what it would be saying. Now that would be, I guess it wouldn't be speaking in a language we understand, Jim.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
First time caller line, welcome to Coast. You're on the air with us. Hi there.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
This is Melvin Nodine in Indiana.
Hello.
And I've been trying a long time to get a hold of you. Earlier on the UFOs and flying saucers and this has been quite some time ago, but I haven't heard any of your guests talking on this subject about I guess they're flying discs or lights at Marfa, Texas. And whether I had a brochure on that, and I can't find it, but the people in that area said that you can go out there on any given night and watch these discs, and if you try to approach any of them, they just fly away. I just wonder if Jim has any comments, any knowledge of if they ever found out what they are, or, well, what's the story on that?
Marfa, Texas. And where is Marfa, Texas?
It's out in far
western Texas.
So you know where it is, Jim. You ever hear anything about these, James?
Yes, and Melvin, let me tell you, I know about the Marfa lights, and I've actually been out to Marfa and looked at those lights many years ago, and they were there many years ago, and as I understand it, they're still there today. It is a very strange thing. You get up on the high points there, and you look out for just for miles, and you see these lights out there, and sometimes they're kind of moving around. And to me, I wasn't real impressed when I first saw them because it looked like headlights moving around off in the distance. But when we went over there to where we saw these lights, there was nothing there. And they say that these lights have been seen, as you said, apparently you can go there almost any given night and you can see these lights. Now, of course, there are people who argue that this is lights from the electromagnetic static energy of the Earth, and that it creates, I guess, something akin to ball lightning. But it sure stayed steady, and they sure moved around a lot when I saw them. And the other night, somebody brought up the Marfa lights, and like I said, when I saw them, it was just lights moving around out in the distance, which didn't impress me a whole lot. But I met a fellow just the other day who said when he was out there, these lights shot towards him and enlarged and grew in size and intensity and then whooshed away. So I don't know what to tell you other than, yes, I'm aware of the Marfa lights, and indeed it is a mystery.
Jim, have you ever tried to ascertain, because you do believe in visitations by extraterrestrials, where they might be coming from?
Well, it's interesting how our perception of that has changed over the years. back in the 50s, the argument was, do they come from Mars or do they come from Venus? Okay, and then by the late 70s and into the 80s, we got a little more sophisticated, and the question became, do they come from Alpha Centauri or do they come from Zeta Reticuli 5? Okay, and today we're even more sophisticated, and now the question is, do they come from another time? Do they come from another dimension? Do they come from another solar system or galaxy? And frankly, based on all the research I've done, I think the answer is yes.
Yes to all of the above.
All of the above. I think that this is a multi-level phenomenon, and I think that it even goes beyond the physical. I think there are physical ships that are probably visiting here, as has been recorded since time immemorial, but I think there's also a dimensional aspect of this, okay, which a lot of people, I'm sure, would put a spiritual perspective on this, you know, and who's to say? George, if you and I and another fellow were walking through the woods and we encountered a diminutive little character who's kind of greenish looking, and he turned and ran off into the brush, I might say, hey, we just saw an alien. The other fellow might say, hey, I just saw a demon. And you might say, hey, I just saw a leprechaun.
Yep.
You know? So this whole phenomena is based so much on what we ourselves bring to it.
Whatever we would say, though, we could all agree that it was very strange.
That's true, and that's the key point. There is a reality there. We are only arguing about the semantics.
Wildcard line, welcome to Coast. You are on the air with Jim Mars. Hi there.
Hey, how's it going, George? This is Marcus calling from Philly. How you doing?
Marcus. Sure, fine. Go ahead.
Jim, honored to talk with you. I own both your books, Alien Agenda and Ruled by Secrecy. Very just excellent. Always love to hear you on the show. I have two things I'd like to bring up. I think you wrote a book on 9/11, and on that morning, at 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 from Boston hit the North Tower. At 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 from Boston hit the South Tower. And then you have a time lapse there which goes to 9:43 a.m. when Flight 77 from Washington took off from Dulles, flew 45 minutes out toward the middle of the country, turned around, flew 45 minutes back, and slammed into the Pentagon. This is long after the daily reaction mechanism for such events was already in place. In other words, NORAD, FAA, whoever, they knew that these planes were hijacked and they were flying into buildings.
That's
why did they not, it's just brought up in your book on 9/11, why they sent planes from Virginia to take down the Flight 77 when there were planes much closer, 10 miles away at Andrews Air Force Base. The second thing I wanted to say, and George, you might want to ask Jim this, so you got any knowledge about what you talked about Monday and Tuesday about Antarctica? I'll take the answer off the line. Thanks.
Okay, very good. And of course, Jim, I'd like to get your reaction to that very quickly. The couple ends of the camp here.
Right. We don't want to go off on a tangerine here.
Exactly.
But to answer his question, basically, those questions have not been put before the authorities that need to answer them. In fact, the whole thing has never been properly investigated. The World Trade Center, which was the collapse of that was the largest single building collapse in history, and yet there's really not been an investigation. All of the ideas we've heard about high temperatures and plane jet fuel burning and steel girders melting and the things collapsing, all of this is theory, because the fact is that they began hauling away that debris just as soon as the smoke cleared, and that all of that was taken away before it was had a chance for anybody of any expertise to study it. Even the 26-man engineer team hired by the Federal Emergency Management Administration were not allowed to examine the steel, and they were not allowed.
And that contractor that came to clear up the rubble before it hardly hit the ground was related to the Bush dynasty.
Had to examine some of the other buildings. The whole thing just cries out for an honest investigation, and it never has happened yet, and I'll just let it go at that.
Jim, I had a guest on a couple days ago who believes that something may be coming very closely to the Earth up by the South Pole, and
and that same contractor moved in to clean up the Oklahoma before it got investigated.
accurately saw in a vision in 1979 a plane crash in Chicago at O'Hare Airport. Now he's got another vision where he thinks something is going to happen to the planet. Philip Plait, who's a very dedicated astronomer, says that's not the case. Have you heard anything about astronomers or scientists going down to Antarctica to do any kind of investigating?
Well, of course, there has been some very strange things going down in Antarctica, beginning with when they announced the discovery of Lake Vostok, which is an underground lake that had been iced over, for centuries, and might hold the keys to understanding what life was like on Earth millions of years ago. And yet, right after announcing this, the information began to close off. There was some news stories about some of our scientists who were being rushed back and being really sick. There is something going on down there. Of course, at the South Pole, we have had rumors for years, at least back to the post-World War II expedition by Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, that they encountered UFOs down in Antarctica. We really don't know what's going on down there because that's a whole continent, and it's just light years away from us as far as information travel goes. I don't know of anybody who's actually been to Antarctica. I know there are a lot of people that have, but I haven't ever run across somebody. That's how distant it is.
And it's not something that you, for example, Jim, could say, I'm going down there to do an investigation. It's not that easy to get there.
No, it's not. And in fact, I would love to do something like that. But there seems to obviously be something going on down there. And it may have to do with the Ross Ice Shelf. The Ross Ice Shelf, unlike the North Pole, which is ice sitting in the water, and if the ice